Hello students, tonight we are going to start a very special topic on solving quadratic equations. But before we move on, let's consider something related to an equation. Let's say if we have two numbers, a and b, if we said that the product of a and b equals to 0, that is a times b equals to 0. And what can we say something about these two numbers, a and b, if the product of them is 0? And this will be rather obvious because we can have either a equals to 0 or b equals to 0. And this is simply because if we have 1 0 for one number, then the product of 0 and the other numbers will always be 0. And this applies to the number b also. If b is 0, then the product of a times b will always be 0. And therefore, if we have an equation like this one, x minus 2 times x plus 1 equals to 0, then either the first factor, x minus 2 is 0, or the second factor, x plus 1 equals to 0. And therefore we can write x minus 2 equals to 0, or x plus 1 equals to 0. And therefore we will have two answers, x equals to 0, or x equals to minus 1. But in fact, we can see that the original equation, on the left hand side, we have a factor format. And what if we expand these two factors? And we will have x squared plus x minus 2x minus 2 equals to 0. Or we can further simplify it as x squared minus x minus 2 equals to 0. And now we have an equation like this, x squared minus x minus 2 equals to 0. And this equation is rather different from the linear equations we have come across in Form 1 and Form 2, because we have a square term here, the square of x. And so this equation is signified by the highest power, the greatest power of 2. And therefore, we call this a quadratic equation. Quadratic equation. 二次方程. And so, if we are required to solve this equation, this quadratic equation, then we have to work our way backwards. And of course, we have to factorize it, factorize the left hand side, and then we have to make the other side a 0. And then we can apply this rule. If the product of two numbers is 0, then either the first factor or the second factor will be 0. And finally, we will come up with two answers. Usually, we have two answers for a quadratic equation. And since we have two answers for this quadratic equation, we can check whether these answers are correct by back substitute these values into the left hand side. And therefore we can write left hand side equal to, if we have x equals to 2, we have the square of 2 minus 2 minus 2, and this will be 0 and equal to the right hand side. So x equals to 2 is one of the answer of this quadratic equation. And let's try the other one, x equals to minus 1. We have left hand side, the square of minus 1 minus minus 1 minus 2. We have 1 plus 1 minus 2, and again we get the number 0 and equal to the right hand side. And therefore we have two answers for a quadratic equation. And now we can start to solve quadratic equation like this one. And remember, this is not a factorization problem only. We have to find the answer for x. We have to find the value, the final value of x to make this equation, to satisfy this equation. And therefore we start with our factorization first. Since we have 0 on the right hand side, then we can simply factorize the left hand side. We can use the n method we have come across in form 2 and form 3. And this is very simple for using the cross method. We have x plus 2 times x plus 3 equals to 0. We have to always factorize the left hand side or the right hand side first. Sometimes this expression can be on the right hand side of the equation. So we have a times b equals to 0. Therefore we have either a equals to 0 or b equals to 0. Therefore x equals to minus 2 or x equals to minus 3. So we have two answers. And in fact, these two answers have a different name in quadratic equation. We usually call this the roots of a quadratic equation. And actually, roots means the answer of the equation. And let's look at another example. It seems that this is not a quadratic equation, x squared plus 4 equals to 4x. But if we can simply rearrange the terms such that there will be a 0 on either side or one of the two sides of the equation. Therefore, we can do it in this way. We have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals to 0. And this 0 is very important. One of the objectives in solving a quadratic equation is to make one side of the equation to become 0. And now we can start to factorize the left hand side. And it seems that this is a perfect square. Therefore, we have x minus 2 bracket square equals to 0. And since it's a very special case, it is a square, the square of x minus 2. Therefore, it is obvious that x will be equals to 2. X is 2. And alternatively, you can do this in this way. You can write x minus 2 times x minus 2 equals to 0. We have x minus 2 equals to 0 or x minus 2 equals to 0. Therefore, this answer is also 2 for the final value of x. And it happens that for a perfect square, these two answers, these two roots are the same. And usually we call this a repeated roots or double roots. Repeated roots. They are just the same. And again, we have another example here. We have a times a minus 4 equals to 21. And we can rewrite this by expanding the left hand side. We have a squared minus 4a equals to 31. And remember, we have to make one side to 0. Therefore, we move the 21 to the left hand side, such that the right hand side will become 0. And now again, we have a quadratic equation. Therefore, we factorize it. And this will be a minus 7 times a plus 3 minus 4a. Therefore, using the cross method, we have a minus 7 times a plus 3 equals to 0. We have a times b equal to 0. Therefore, either the first one will be 0 or the second one will be 0. Therefore, a equals to 7 or a equals to minus 3. So, that's the end of our lesson in solving quadratic equation.